Architecture shapes the world around us, but the pathway into the profession is often not visible. For many young people, architecture remains distant, misunderstood, or simply inaccessible. Questions of who becomes an architect, how they get there, and what routes are available are becoming increasingly important as the profession responds to social and environmental change, educational reform, and the need for greater diversity and inclusion. At the same time, new pathways are emerging, from apprenticeships to alternative models of education and practice, challenging traditional assumptions about how architectural careers begin and develop. Today's episode is an opportunity to explore how the profession engages the next generation, what barriers still exist, and what meaningful change could look like. We're delighted to be joined by Victoria Thornton, founder of the Thornton Education Trust, whose work has been instrumental in opening up access to architecture and supporting young people to see themselves as future shapers of the built environment. Victoria, welcome. It would be great to set the scene to start with. So I wonder if you would tell us a bit about what first drew you to focus on access to architecture and the built environment.
Yeah, so that's always an interesting start for me because I fell upon architecture. I actually wanted to walk to work and it happened to be 15 minutes away. There was a job at the RIBA. So I sort of wasn't thinking about architecture at all. But having gone there, listened to obviously all the architectural lessons, lectures, etc., it made me realize that actually we don't learn about this ourselves. So it's not in our education system. And therefore, we don't have any say about it as well because we don't even have the language for it. So for me, it was saying, actually, if I was interested, there were a lot of other people. It just wasn't in our education system. And it was a very closed environment, I would say. So the idea of that actually bringing it out to the public domain was, for me, was quite important.
Yeah. So, and what have you found in your work in terms of how young people perceive architecture in the built environment? What is their perception?
Well, it's interesting when you start working with them. They really are very engaged. They do have an opinion about it, but they don't they don't have the tools, the language to actually express it. But I think young people, particularly, they live out in the street. They engage actually with the public realm and people a lot more than we think they do. And so they really have a much more of awareness of what their surroundings are and what's good and what's bad, what should be improved and things. So I think there is an interest, but you need to obviously bring that to the fore with them. Like with everything, I always think when you can ride a bike, it's easy. But when you can't, it's the most difficult thing in the world. So I think architecture is a bit like that.
Yeah. So in terms of actually helping them understand architecture as a career path, do you think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in that area? Yeah,
a tremendous amount. I mean, one of the issues is the schools don't really see it as a career path, as one of the things. There's a lot of buts, this, that, or the other against about it. So I think that puts people off, but also it's just not in the education system. So if we don't bring it if people are not aware about actually the impact of their environment, so we don't have any of the education about it, they're not going to be able to think this is a route for them. So I think there's a lot to be done on it. There has been, but I think we need to do a lot more.
And so interestingly about those kind of systemic issues in terms of access to architecture, do you think that's the biggest barrier that young people face is information, or are there other things as well that need to be
I think the information is one. And then when they get into it, the careers, many of the schools, when one talks about disadvantaged groups, most probably their careers is not, their career of advice doesn't really extend to here as well. So the potential of those children, young people, it's most probably limited as well when they see this as a profession, and they don't see maybe them being automatically going into a professional route. So I think that is one of the issues. And then we can talk about actually more education at a lower level, at a younger level, which I think is also, it's not there at the moment anyway.
So do you think that, I think both of us would probably agree that perhaps diversity is an issue in the industry as a whole anyway. Is that lack of representation part of the barrier to young people about what they see, what they perceive the industry to be made of?
Yes, I think one of the obvious things is if you can't see yourself in the mirror. I mean, as females, that was an issue. It can be still a bit of an issue. But if you can't see someone like you in the profession, or you are very in the minority, then it does make you feel excluded from it. So I think there's an automatic feeling that I need more like me around to make me feel that I can be part of this profession. So we're still quite a long way to go with that. And it depends which part of the country as well, to be truthful.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, we're potentially at risk of losing talent coming into the industry just because of that lack of information, lack of representation that's already there.
Yes. I think it is about that, but also you then get into, as they get further into it, then they recognize it's 5 years. If we go through a traditional route plus another 2, the fees are very high. So although there are a lot of barriers, even if you want to do it, so you have to be very determined and understand what it is to actually take you through. Otherwise, you drop out. So I think sometimes there is a dropout rate when they don't always understand actually what it entails.
Yeah. So in terms of addressing those barriers and trying to, open the doors and create pathways, I already mentioned there's obviously a lot more alternative routes and into practice and different ways of practicing as well, of course. So I'm really interested in your career. What kind of positive changes have you seen in the landscape of both architectural education and in practice itself?
I think there's more openness, not to be so closed, so actually look into the real world as such. So I think it's very interesting to see some of the practices, how the younger practice particularly, their route they see as part of their sort of social value, I think, which is much stronger now, I think, than 10, 15 years ago. So if you think about the small practices like Urban Symbiotics, Free House, Catena Architects Assemble, Narrative Practice, all of these are engaging with those issues, particularly around diversity. So they're finding a way to connect with the real world and people, and actually say that's part of their practice, it's part of their DNA. And I think that is one of the key areas as such. The idea of engaging through schools has always been there, but again, I think that is becoming more normal. And I think the other way is through projects where this goes into planning, in fact, where the planning applications expect stakeholder engagement, and where the council are actually pushing for actually engaging with children and young people, because there's skill set in there as well. It's not just about an awareness of their environment, but they can see a sort of double win in there. So I think that is happening a lot more. And clients also are starting to recognize that value as well. So there is quite a lot of change has been going on. But as usual, I would say that's a first step. Need to go further forward. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's really positive to kind of hear about the change that you've seen during that time. And I think I've seen some of that as well. What do you think a really truly accessible and inclusive pathway into architecture might look like for the future?
Well, I think the apprenticeships was also mentioned before, but actually apprenticeships must be the way. I mean, the barriers are fees, moving, actually, it's a long process. It's very isolated, I think, sometimes, though we think of it very team, group. But actually, I think in the education part, it's quite isolating, quite singular. So the apprenticeship actually gets them into the real world, but also gives them more practical experience rather than waiting for 3 odd years. They're involving and they're bringing their real world experience into the practice. So I think all that combination of apprenticeships is really good. Obviously, the key worry is that funding about apprenticeships. If that gets reduced, then that gives one of the key pathways will get stopped or demoted as such. So I think it's that, but I think it's also actually that the practices are needing to go out more into their community, be it schools, be it youth clubs, and actually engage with those children and young people to, in effect, get them excited and inspired by it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not, it's about being inspired, it's having curiosity, all those things that make you think, yeah, this sounds really lovely. I want to do this kind of career. So it's multi. It's not just one thing. We tend to go apprenticeships, but you actually have a lot before that. And if you don't start engaging with the children and young people, and it's usually through school education, to be truthful, if there isn't anything there, then you haven't got a pipeline in a way. It's a very narrow pipeline already through there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've already touched on this already in terms of how practices can support and nurture, young people, the next generation. Are there any other things that you think practices could do better in terms of how we engage and how we try and nurture that future talent?
Yeah, I think obviously, if you talk about so it's work experience, but good work experience. I think and actually having a mentor in there in the practice. So it becomes a formal part of practice. It's part of your governance, as it were. So it isn't just a nice have someone's interested in it. It needs to be formulated much more in the practice, even as a small practice. But as long as you know this is part and parcel of your own organization, and that it's a longer term program, not just a one-off stopping and starting. Yes, that's nice, but we haven't got anybody else to do it, so we stop it again. So those are often the problems. The other ways you can do it is actually do an annual competition with the local community, which will get them very excited about the design. It doesn't have to be just in their area, but it could be on climate change, sustainability. What does a house look like or a home look like? So there's other ways you can connect into the pre-university or A levels to get that interest going. And of course, we talk about going into careers. So career days are very good. I think my only hesitancy, and I will say, is that actually the architects need to be trained to be able to do it. There is an assumption that because I'm an architect, I can go in and I can do this activity. And it's not true. So you actually need some training as well. Yeah. But if you accept that is really a positive thing because you bring that back into the practice as well, I think, again, it's another win-win. So there are different little ways you can do it. And it can just be one-off, once a year. And I think I've said it before that if all architects, if say there's 50,000 architects, if each architect just engaged with 10 kids a year for an hour, so it's 10 hours, we would actually reach 500,000 kids. Amazing. Therefore, you get a step change. So I think it's about building capacity and, again, recognizing that practice has a role in this. It's not something on the side. It should be really embedded into every practice. And then I think we will get this incredible step change and lots of diversity will come about through that as well.
Yeah. And we've already touched on kind of traditional routes into practice, apprenticeships. Are there any other routes emerging, or any routes that you would like to see as alternative to get young people into it?
Yeah, I think I've talked about the school routes, but I think the other way is sometimes through some activities or programs. So there are through number of the not-for-profits in the built environment. So I would say Matt and Fiona, Beyond the Box, Urban Learners. There's a number of these who, interestingly, are actually architect-led. So they're a not-for-profit, but they decided to move into another form of architecture as such. Yeah. And actually, if you have those kind of programs that come and work into the community, you can connect your practice to that. And that gives you another route for those young people to view it and then connect into the practice and then out again. Sometimes it's not a direct, other times it can be, but sometimes practices say, we don't have the resources, we don't have this or that, but there are ways of connecting into other organizations who have the built environment at the core of their work. So I think that is the kind of the two things. I mean, you have to keep saying apprenticeships because at least it means that they can earn at the same time, because again, as we know, is a very expensive route for everybody in university, but particularly with the sort of 5 years, it's 5 years. But there's other things of just seeing how your projects yourself through clients can actually always engage children and young people as stakeholders. So that is another route I think is a good route, that if you just think every time you did development, there was maybe a funding element in there to actually do a project with the young people, that would help that route through. So it's a sort of pipeline. It's not from A to B, but it's bringing those. And of course, you're going to have, maybe 10% of 10%. But the fact is, even that first of that 100% have now had an understanding much more and been inspired by their environment, and they can take that into their other life. I don't think it's automatically that you go into architecture, you stay in architecture. Yeah. Architecture, is about critical thinking. It is about aesthetics. It is about materials. It's about the whole rather than just the sum of the parts. And that's an incredible education. So even if you give them a bit of that helps take them forward, even wherever they're going.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely my experience as well, that, you can see engaging young people in any design process can be really transformational, and it's never wasted. And I always get upset when people tell me they're failed architects. I'm like, no, there's no such thing. Everything is good learning, and everything can help us to have better environments. And that leads really nicely onto the kind of next thing I was really interested to get your view on, which is about the role of practices, the role of industry, and the role of education, and where the kind of responsibility lies in terms of making change. And you've already talked about the culture of architecture, embedding some of that engagement into our projects, and also just making sure that we are knowledgeable and thoughtful about how we engage, and training ourselves to do it, not assuming we can do it. What do you think, as individual architects, need to do? What's their responsibility in actually supporting that succession and supporting next generation into practice?
That's an interesting one. I think for individual architects, I think it will come back into their education themselves at the university. And one of the programs that we've done as TED is create a report, really surveying the architectural schools to say who is engaging with children and young people in one form or another, be it a module, a one-off, or it's actually embedded as part of the program. And I think if that needs to be where actually the individual architects need to start, because then there's a better understanding, it's real world as well. And so then they take it in and see what they can do on a personal level, which obviously, some of the ways is just working with these not-for-profits or others who are doing it. Actually, also, I think because a lot of individual architects, you're working all the time, so it's not like you've got loads of time off. But if you can just think of that volunteering, that extra support into the community, helping where there might be something needs to be changed, or there's an idea of just even doing a little competition to say, what can we do with this area? How can we change it? Those type of things can help a lot. But at the same time, as individual architects, I would say need to stand up for it and bring it into a practice, because it is at practice level this change will have. And really to say this is part of the practice's DNA. And I think a lot of young architects want to see that as well. I think that's one of the key other changes, that young architects say it's not enough just to do the architect. They want to see what impact it's had, and what form that practice does, and that they want to see that is really much more embedded. So when they go, they will be retained as well because they feel they're doing that work. Having said that, one knows and one recognizes it's hard within a practice. But at the same time, as I always say, is who else is going to change the thing of the built environment and people's perception of it but the profession itself? Yeah. You can't expect bankers to be doing it, But there is a feeling sometimes, I think, that it is done by others. But actually, the only way change is going to happen is by the profession itself.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get so, stuck into the weeds of what we're doing, we forget that we've got some opportunities and some agency to actually champion these things. So I think that's really important message for individual architects and designers, as a whole to think about. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about opportunities for practice. If you had a kind of really strong message for practices listening to this in terms of how they engage and what they should be focusing on, is there a priority? Is there a particular thing that you think practices should really make sure that they deliver?
I don't think there's ever one thing, but one of the areas that could be gaining more traction, though it is a government. So the government has said there should be a creative curriculum. How that's defined is still, we're all waiting to hear. But the fact is, if you bring the creative curriculum, we will say architecture is part and parcel. It's a real world thing as well. It's not something in abstract. The kids can understand that. So primary schools, where everyone wants to go into just having an activity primary schools, I think they can think of what impact, again, they have on those kids and what activities would work. But there's always, it's not a but, I have to always be careful, a but. When you're working with schools, primary is really good because you have one teacher who teaches right across. At secondary, it's in silos. So you have to think about how, going back to your question, what is the best thing that teacher wants or that school wants? So don't just automatically, and I think it applies to everything, we can get engaged with everything. No, just think what actually works for you. And if it's about you might be doing educational buildings, then think about it in those terms. Or if you think about sustainability, think about it in that way. So I think that is the one of the ways you can go forward. It is very hard within schools. They are just like architects, full, and everything's going on, and it's really hard to go outside of that. But that education pathway, going back to diversity, is the only way it's going to come through. Otherwise, those who are really interested come singularly, but you've got 30 in a class, that is actually more powerful to engage with the whole class than those who particularly want to do it, which is great. But that is one part of it. But you actually need to take education through that. So support the idea of education in schools, for example. Yeah. But I'm going to do a but. and not about the word architecture. Architecture is a theme. It isn't a subject in schools. So you can use it through history, geography, math, English, we talk about STEM, all those things. Architecture, buildings can fit within it really, really well. But if you try and say, I'm going to teach architecture, then it's not going to work. And it's nice, but it's not really going to work.
Yeah. So knowing your audience a bit and understanding what their needs are really important. And so then the other kind of party in this environment are the education providers themselves. And through the apprenticeship route, we've really seen a benefit of having, much stronger relationships with the education providers and being able to work with them collaboratively. What do you think those education providers should be doing themselves to help widen access into the profession?
Well, part of we go through to it's not in our education system. So in a way, you're training the trainers to do the training. And those providers will understand some of it, but actually helping them to understand the wider part of it, the wider possibilities, that actually is really good. So they will see a narrow route into architecture, and it's like to be an architect, but it doesn't mean to say actually an architect could be a project manager. Actually, graphic communications is part of it, or even going into planning. So I think as the providers is looking at it as a built environment, and how that training can help those other areas. It's not automatic that you end up with being an architect. It has that wider thing. So I think providers, if they can understand that, then it gives them more opportunities as well to see how they can engage in a better, meaningful way.
So how could practices engage more through the Thornton Education Trust in engaging with young people and the next generation?
Well, I think obviously one of our obvious ways we set up in 2021 was to bring about an awards program, which actually allows architects and not-for-profits to put into the awards. But it's really about showing what they've been doing and then sharing that with others. So it is a means to create a number of case studies, which is what we see. So we have over 300 case studies now of different projects. And in fact, we're looking at what those approaches are. So we get some sort of kind of route out or pipeline. But it really is about getting those case studies and then sharing that knowledge amongst the community. So we really call it a community of practitioners, a community of practice that we felt didn't exist, but actually did exist, going back to my earlier points of the younger ones are finding this route through. So it's many of the small practices, actually, a few medium practice, who are coming to these awards and submitting. But the key thing is it gives an opportunity to learn from each other and make also connections with it. So for us, the awards, the Inspire Future Generation Awards, which are really about, I'm going to say more about placemaking. And the new awards, which is the Imagine program, Imagine Awards, is actually specifically to do with schools and school teachers. And actually, when you're connecting, doing a program or a project, you want to work with a school, this is the way you can then put that submission into the awards. And then from that, we actually create TET dialogues where we have 3 people in a panel talking about what they've learned and what was good and wasn't. So we can learn by our mistakes as well, rather than it just being a presentation. So it's very much more literally a dialogue. And then finally, we're taking that into research. And again, I mentioned the School of Architecture report, but the Empowering Environments report actually takes that body of awards from the Inspire and looks at it in terms of what are the trends, where there's been change, where it's geographical, and also about funding. Because again, I think it can be one of the issues is there's so little funding in it. It's sometimes seen as pro bono, and we sort of want to say this is more important than pro bono. So even if we talk at social value, it has a monetary aspect to it. Yeah. And so all these submissions and these projects, we can see a flowering across the country as well. And also we look internationally as well, because I think we can share, we can learn from others abroad. So we find we have 10% of our awards submissions are now coming from different countries and not just English speaking ones. Yeah. So for us, it's how you can learn from each other, share, but bringing those in. And actually on a practical side is that those architectural practices can say they have this sort of stamp. I'm going to say stamp of approval. It sounds too awful, but sort of saying, I've won an award, and they actually can show to their clients as well. So it's a sort of practical, but really at the end of the day, we just recognize it. It's just everybody wanting to share each other, to each other and around each other and learn from each other. And I think we're very proud of them after 5 years, and they seem to have, really gained traction. But we are specifically with children and young people, so we narrow it down.
That sounds really fantastic. I mean, I'm interested to know in terms of impact, whether you're measuring impact in any particular ways, or you're seeing the projects measure impact in any particular ways.
Well, yes, and that's one of the things why we're looking now, doing a research into what approaches, what impact, how they are used later on. And that's the key thing. If they, and sometimes if they're replicated, and that's another issue. One-offs are great, but they're quite costly sometimes. So really saying, how can we create really good quality projects or programs and resources even that then can be used in a replicable way, so to become again a normal. And some of the like Grosvenor Estates town have actually done resources around how you go through a process as such. So I think it's sometimes process, sometimes activity, but making it so it has the right impact for the children as well. So in terms of, impact and valuation of it, it's trying to find out how much, where it really impacts on the children and young people. Because if it doesn't, then it's not doing its job. Because that's what fundamentally it should be doing. That is hard because they move around. This is one thing in their life. But you can see that more and more are looking to find these routes. So if we can give more of those routes and through the programs, then I think we'll again get that not just that impact, but we can build more capacity in terms of the pipeline, as it were, coming back into architecture.
So, and in terms of this kind of growing body of knowledge and sharing that knowledge, have you got a vision in terms of what you would like to happen with all of this information and activities that the Trust is pulling together?
For us, it's actually creating a resource, open access resource that others can take as reference. They can replicate it, giving advice as well. So that will be our next part of it. And also some training to help those practices or individuals go off the starting point, how to start it. We're not here to, we don't see our role as running a project. This is what the kind of project, but we can actually look at what the approaches are, how you can go about it, how can you start it, how you can introduce it into your practice as well. Because if you can just say, these are the routes you can start doing in your practice in a small way. I always remember with Open House, it was like, I think BBC said it was a mad idea that went global. Well, I think this one's another mad idea.
And it's going global.
But it's, but by other words, it's a small action, big impact. So never try and do everything big. So really that's what our training will be, saying these are the key things. And then you can do your stepping stone. But don't try and say, we're going to do this big program. We're going to have this big action plan. It doesn't usually work. So just take small kind of baby steps, but you can have as much impact sometimes doing those than just the big idea.
It's always interesting to create a bit of competition as well, I think, in terms of, trying to see, are we doing it as well as others? Do you think in terms of the engagement with global activity that you talked about, global submissions you're having for the awards, are we leading the way in the UK? Are we seeing precedents in other parts of the world that we should be looking to?
Well, I think we're quite unique. That there is something under UIA, but it's not open to everybody. And so we've really made this access. And it's not just about architecture, it's urban designers, planners, landscape. So it's looking at the built environment and communities as well, community organization, connecting. So it's not that narrowness that you can get sometimes, but actually having that with the international input as well. So we're seeing, well, as I said, we've already got international submissions, and we know more and more are going to come through. The other thing, just kind of reflecting back earlier, which relates to this, is actually really having mentors within the practice. That is always really important. So when we see these awards and the projects, we're saying, one of the questions we are, what have you learned yourself? What is your reflection yourself? So tendency what the kids did, but actually the reflection is also you're learning and you're taking that back into the practice. So if there's a sort of mentors in there, but it becomes part of the whole practice, not because a few individuals like it. And I think that, again, is my thing, embedding rather than just, it's nice, that person goes and then it stops, etc. Embed into the practice. It should be, for us, it should be part of your DNA.
Yeah, and part of that feedback loop and the management, and I think that's really important. And on a similar matter, like something I'm always really interested in is comparing architecture and the built environment to other industries as well, and just how they operate. And sometimes it feels like we're a little bit old-fashioned in terms of the way we do things. Have you looked to any other industries? I don't know, the medical profession or law, or any other professions who are doing anything similar, or that we could learn from or look to?
No, to be truthful, we don't. We look to the other disciplines within the built environment, partly because there's a synergy, there's an understanding, you sort of got the framework. But you always can learn from others as well. So I don't think we should be enclosed and cocooned. I think we always can. You can learn from other people, and I think that's what's important. And by actually reaching out to others in the other industries and things, you're actually showing the value again of one's architecture education.
And I think we need to be better as architects in engaging with the other professions. Right from the start, we're not great at that all the time. You talked a bit about the embedding things into the culture of the practice. Have you seen any particular examples of impact on practitioners or on practice that you've seen through that engagement they've done? Because obviously we focus quite often on the impact on the young people. What about impact in the other direction, like impact actually on practitioners and the way they operate? Have you seen that really make a difference?
Yes, I think where it is opening up into the other world of the public, not just seeing them as clients. And I think that is another thing. We always, the architecture profession, the education is always about being close, a School of Architecture, and then it's about clients. And it's actually, these kind of programs take you outside of that. And that information, that knowledge and inspiration you bring back, because often you're surprised how many people just think this is incredible. So you bring that back into the practice. So I think there's the Stanton Williams work with Islington College on a yearly basis. There's Alfred Hall Monaghan do only come several times in part of their projects, but actually annually as well. So I think you're finding a mechanism to do this. I would say, if I'm truthful, I think the small practices do it. I would love to see all the big practices doing it as part of their DNA.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have more, not potential, but they have the resources perhaps to do it more than a small practice. Or you join with a small practice, or you join with a not-for-profit doing that work, who can help you learn how to do it as well.
Yeah.
So there's different ways, but yes, it definitely.
Yeah. So collaboration always really powerful. Yeah. And do you think it's important to think about our kind of digital messaging as well? Because we touched on the importance of being able to spread the message and give young people opportunities when perhaps they don't live in a place where there is an architect on their doorstep. Yeah. How valuable is it to put out digital information and share things online through social media or websites, things like that?
I think it's really important because they're much more visual. But you've just got to, when you're doing that, it's actually how are you going to reach that group? We automatically think we just put it on Instagram, TikTok, and it happened. But if you're trying to target a bit more, then it's about a communication campaign within that. The other thing is having an interview with actually Arabs about AI, more originally about their own practice, ethics, etc. But then if I talk about children and young people and ethics of AI. AI, there is issues there, and one has to be really careful. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of opportunities with AI with children and young people, especially when they start to use it much more than us. Slightly older, not necessarily not using it, but also about how you question AI. And I think that learning, and I think that's where architecture, I always call it a why. I remember working with an A-level art teacher, and I asked one of the students, why are you doing that? And I was berated for saying, you don't do a why. And I said, well, okay, architecture is all about a why. And I think that kind of questioning of AI helping them. And I think, again, the sort of through using that creative process, that it gets them to question it. And therefore, that will help them as well, just generally. But it helps them to understand when they're looking at visuals, so kind of buildings through AI, what's really going on in that, rather than just accepting there it is and things. So I think AI, you said what's going forward, and AI is actually one of the things I think we need to be looking at. And maybe that's what practices can also do, thinking further forward, that they can be doing programs actually using AI within the built environment with children and young people. And that would be maybe a really good program. And I think I will think about it more as well for us now.
Take that one away. That's
or an AI category.
AI category, exactly. That would be fantastic. It'd be really good. So I think, we want our next generation to be creative, curious, but we also want them to come and scrutinize things as well. Yeah. And do you feel that the kind of pressures and demands that there are on architects in terms of the threat of AI, the level of responsibility in terms of safety, technical standards, do you think all of those things can be addressed through better engagement, through getting more young people into it? Or do you think there is a bigger challenge ahead for us as a profession?
I think that is a challenge. I think it's a challenge that you haven't really grappled with totally yet. But then on the other hand, if you're working with kids and young people, they're in a way can be more attuned to it, or they ask those questions. I mean, I think kids and young people are great because they ask that real basic question. We can't go round it, but they will go, so why are you doing that?
Yeah.
You know? And actually that's most probably cuts through a lot of it as well. But it also, therefore, again, going back to training or creating resources to help those who want to do work or engage with young people through AI, then these are the sort of maybe the parameters of it, in a way to help. So I think a lot of our work is sometimes to help the practitioners do the thing. We don't see our role as that, but we see our role as helping to build capacity by actually creating these resources, training to help you take it forward without it being such a time, effort and consuming and everything else that you sort of back off it. So we want you to take it on board. To be truthful, the profession is the one who has to do it. But how can we help you do that?
Yeah, that sounds great. And the other thing that occurs to me, I think I work in education design, so I'm lucky I get to work with young people and teachers, as you know, and that's what made me interested in doing that. Are there things that you think as designers, no matter what sector we're working with, there are things that you think we as designers and architects could do better in terms of designing for young people and helping them engage with their environment and making it work for them?
Well, again, I would definitely say it's actually doing a sort of two-way process. I think it's another example of actually working with a developer, had a whole development, and we had practice was the obviously designer of it. And we had a project where we did some work with a group from that area and came back. And I have to say, the designer said, if we had known what we know now, we wouldn't have designed it in that way.
Really
so I think it's really hearing that back about the local community. And I think, again, young people much more know what's going on in a way, but they're thinking about not just themselves. There's a perception they only think about themselves, but they're the intersection between adults and the siblings. So, and they're out there usually on the street, as it were, using that area. So they're much more aware of their local area, good and bad.
Yeah.
But if you take that route of engaging, so a participatory design or not consultation, I hate that word, but if participatory engagement, proper meaningful engagement, then I think that actually, well, we've seen so many examples and seen it at the awards that actually that's had a really positive effect on the overall design. So not to exclude, include. So I think it's inclusive rather than exclusive.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think it's we've talked a lot about barriers and challenges and things that need to get better. Is there something that gives you real optimism about the future? Are there things, activities, events, changes you see out there that make you feel really positive about the future of the profession?
I think yes. I mean, strangely, television programs help it a lot. You know, absolutely. I think there's role models. I mean, I remember one 15-year-old saying, I really want to get an architecture because I saw Zaha Hadid. So it's more role models, not stars necessarily. I think one has to be a bit of a balance in that, the celebrity status, which is quite hard to get to in architecture as well. So, but it's actually those role models that will help that more programs understand the process. And with grand designs, for example, that actually shows the passion when you see something complete. And I think that is a route to actually, by showing, and I suppose, as I say, having founded Open House, is to show and tell. So to actually do that will help a lot of it. Obviously, the other side is policy, and you can't get away from it. If there's policy, if the politicians understand the value, then it will spread. So we can be doing bottom up, which we're all doing, but actually we do need a top down as well. So that value there is a lot more work needs to be done with that kind of grouping, which, some of the profession of the built environment have achieved that. I think we in the architecture profession need to actually be doing more on that to show the thinking and actually the kind of the skill set that architects can bring.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite difficult because it's not in a nice little box.
Yeah.
And, when you say design, what do you mean by design? Well, if you can't how to do an engineering, how to do a structure, you can sort of get it. So I think there needs to be good to look at that to see how I can help it forward. So I think there's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
I think how one structures that is really important, rather than doing everything. You're saying, what are the key things we need to be focused on? And, climate change is understood, and that really applies. But sometimes I think people don't understand that a building has real relationship to sustainability and climate change. And they can see you as a role of changing, having an impact. And therefore, it's a much more positive view of you.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think that there is a disconnect, isn't there, often between the two. So having talked about that optimism and opportunities, what changes would you really like to see in the future, in the next 10 years? What would you like to see?
Well, my obvious one is in the education system, both at schools of architecture, because if you don't start the pipeline, I did a part 3 AA talking about our work, and everybody in the room put their hand up, and they weren't just AA students, by the way, only a third, and they all put their hand up, said, yeah, this is great, we'd like to do it. So then they said, well, how many of you can take it back to your practice? You got 10%. How many think it would have impact? 0. So the education system, you need to get that pipeline through. So that is on the profession side, but of course I'll come back to education within school education, the creative curriculum, understanding how we can engage in that. And also just more, I would say, the clients as well. So the clients seeing the value of the stakeholder engagement. It isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. And so there are 3 areas that one could focus on. And I think that will start to really make that step change. Which we need. We really need. And what would you say to a young person who's considering, even an inkling of thinking about going into architecture or the built environment? What advice would you give them? I would my main advice would be test it out. Because one sometimes has this view of what it's like, and that's not to diminish it, but sometimes you can be doing the work experience, you can be doing these projects these not-for-profits are doing, or you can even go and try and do. If there was an annual competition for kids on design, then they would get a view of it. What we did a few years back was a year with the University of Westminster, though it wasn't necessarily with their students, whereby we did a theme of design A, but then we looked at the different roles. But it was still, you're still thinking that critical thinking, a thinking kind of design term, but say, as a planner, what does that mean? Not just I'm a plan, but how do I think? And it would go back to the thinking, and how to be an engineer, how to be an architect, how to be a project manager. So by the end of the week, they had a much better sense of the different parts of the built environment. And I think we need to help that, but do it in an imaginative way, rather than just saying, here's the role here. And at the moment, I think a lot of the professions are disparate, so there's not an engagement saying how could we create something like this going through. And I suppose my other side of it, of course, when we talk in London, there's a lot more of this activity going on than elsewhere, so it's really spreading. So think about how you spread it nationally rather than just in one region as such.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point to end on, because creating opportunities outside where the cluster of professionals are is challenging sometimes. I think we definitely need to open that engagement up and find ways to broaden the opportunities for young people.
Yeah.
So thank you, Victoria. That was fantastic conversation. It's been really, really thoughtful, really important as well, I think, for us as a profession to think about our succession, not just routes into architecture, but how we as practitioners engage, support and inspire. You talked about inspire right at the beginning. I think that's really important, how we inspire the next generation of people shaping the built environment. And thank you for all your work, you know, in Open House, originally Open City, and now in Thornton Education Trust, because I think it really does continue to make a big difference to widening access, to keeping the conversation open, and just to helping young people see architecture as something they can belong to, engage with, contribute to. So thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.